You're just lower-class garbage who got lucky. My daughter-in-law's words echoed through her parents' marble foyer as 30 guests stared in horror. She had no idea that I owned the mortgage on their mansion, that I held their financial future in my hands, but she was about to find out. My name is Linda Morrison. I'm 64 years old, and this is the story of how I taught my daughter-in-law the most expensive lesson of her privileged life. Let me take you back to where this all began. I grew up in a small industrial town in Ohio, the daughter of a factory worker and a seamstress. My father worked the assembly line at the automotive plant for 42 years, his hands permanently stained with grease and oil. My mother took in sewing work from neighbors, her fingers moving tirelessly over fabric late into the night after she'd finished her day job at the textile mill. We weren't poor exactly, but we were what people politely called working class. What others less politely called lower class. Money was always tight. I wore hand-me-downs from cousins and neighbors. My school supplies came from the bargain bins at the discount store. But my parents had something that money couldn't buy: dignity, work ethic, and an unwavering belief that education could change everything. I worked 3 jobs to put myself through community college. I waited tables at a diner from 6 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon. Then I went to classes. After classes, I worked as a janitor at an office building from 6 in the evening until midnight. On weekends, I babysit for families in the nicer neighborhoods, watching their children play with toys that cost more than my monthly rent. I was exhausted constantly, living on coffee and determination, but I earned my associate's degree in business administration. Then I worked my way through another 2 years to get my bachelor's degree, graduating at 28 when most of my high school classmates already had established careers. But I did it. I walked across that stage in my rented cap and gown with my parents crying in the audience, and I felt like I had conquered the world. My first real job was as a secretary at Morrison Financial Services, a small mortgage lending company run by Richard Morrison. Richard was 15 years older than me, a quiet accountant who had started his own business helping working-class families secure home loans. He wasn't flashy or wealthy, just steady and kind. He saw something in me beyond my cheap suits and scuffed shoes. He promoted me to executive assistant within 6 months, then to office manager within a year. We worked long hours together, building his small company one client at a time. Somewhere between the late-night paperwork and the shared coffee breaks, we fell in love. We married when I was 30, a small ceremony at the courthouse with 2 witnesses. No fancy reception, no elaborate honeymoon, just 2 people who understood the value of hard work and building something real. 2 years later, our son Daniel was born. He was perfect, with Richard's calm disposition and my determination. We bought a modest house in a decent neighborhood, nothing fancy but ours. We paid our bills on time, saved what we could, and raised our son to understand that money was earned through hard work, not handed out freely. Richard's business grew slowly but steadily. He never advertised or pursued wealthy clients. He focused on helping regular people, working families who needed someone to believe in them the way he had believed in me. I managed the office, handled the books, and learned everything about the mortgage business. Life wasn't glamorous, but it was good. It was honest. It was ours. Then, 15 years ago, Richard collapsed at his desk from a massive heart attack. He was 57 years old. One moment he was reviewing loan applications, the next he was gone. My world shattered. Daniel was 20, away at college, and suddenly I was alone with a mortgage company to run and a grief so profound I could barely breathe. Everyone expected me to sell the business. Richard's lawyer suggested I liquidate the assets, take the money, and retire comfortably. But I couldn't do it. This company was Richard's legacy, his dream of helping working people achieve homeownership. So I learned everything I could about running the business. I took courses in finance and property law. I networked with other lenders. I worked 16-hour days, pouring my grief into building what Richard had started, and something unexpected happened. The business thrived. Without Richard's conservative approach, I expanded cautiously into investment properties and larger commercial loans. I hired a small staff. I diversified the portfolio. Within 5 years, Morrison Property Holdings had grown from a small neighborhood lender to a company managing 47 residential mortgages across 3 counties. The business was now worth approximately $8.5 million in assets. I owned properties, held mortgages, and had investments that generated steady income. I was, by any reasonable definition, wealthy. But I never changed my lifestyle. I still lived in the same modest house Richard and I had bought 30 years ago. I drove a 10-year-old Honda Civic. I shopped at discount stores and clipped coupons. Not because I had to, but because that's who I was. The money was security, not status. It was Richard's legacy, not my identity. Daniel graduated from college with a degree in business, and I was so proud. I had worked extra hours to help pay his tuition, though he didn't know the full extent of my financial contribution. He thought I was scraping by on Richard's life insurance and the income from a small business. I never corrected that assumption. Daniel got a good job as a pharmaceutical sales representative, making $85,000 a year. It was a solid income, respectable, enough to build a good life. He bought a small house with my help. I gave him $30,000 for the down payment, telling him it was from savings I had set aside over the years. He was grateful, but not surprised. That's what mothers did, right? They sacrificed and saved for their children. He had no idea I could have written that check 100 times over without feeling it. 3 years ago, Daniel called me with excitement bubbling in his voice. "Mom, I met someone. Someone special. Her name is Victoria, and I think she might be the one." My heart soared. I wanted nothing more than for my son to find love, to build the kind of partnership Richard and I had shared. Daniel brought Victoria to meet me the following weekend. She arrived at my modest home in a luxury car, designer sunglasses perched on her head, wearing an outfit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. Victoria Harrington was 32, tall and elegant, with perfectly styled auburn hair and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She worked in luxury event planning, though I later learned this mostly meant coordinating parties for her parents' wealthy friends. The moment Victoria walked through my door, I felt her judgment. Her eyes swept over my living room with its comfortable but outdated furniture, the kitchen with its laminate countertops, the carpet that was clean but worn. "Oh, how quaint," she said, her voice dripping with what she probably thought was politeness, but was actually condescension. "You've done so much with so little, Linda. It's really inspiring how people can make the best of humble circumstances." I smiled and offered her coffee, ignoring the subtle insult. Daniel was glowing with happiness, oblivious to the undertones. Throughout the visit, Victoria asked pointed questions about my background, my work, my lifestyle. Each question felt like an assessment, like she was cataloging my value and finding it wanting. "Where did you go to college?" "Community college? Oh, how practical. And you run a small business? How nice to stay busy. Do you rent this house? You own it? Well, that's fortunate." Daniel told me about Victoria's family. Her father, Charles Harrington, was supposedly a successful businessman in commercial real estate. Her mother, Patricia, was a socialite who spent her days at the country club and her evenings at charity galas. They lived in a mansion on Lakeshore Drive, the most prestigious address in the area. Victoria had grown up with nannies and private schools, summer homes and European vacations. She spoke about her life with casual ease, dropping names of expensive restaurants and exclusive venues like they were common knowledge. Daniel was clearly enchanted by this world, this glimpse into a lifestyle he had never experienced. And I understood. My son had worked hard, achieved success, and now he was being welcomed into a world of wealth and status. How could he not be dazzled? They married 2 years ago in an elaborate ceremony at the Riverside Country Club. The wedding cost $150,000, a sum that made me feel physically ill. The Harringtons paid for everything and made absolutely certain that everyone knew it. At the reception, Patricia Harrington made a speech about how thrilled they were to welcome Daniel into their family, how lucky Victoria was to find such an ambitious young man. She never mentioned me, not once. I was seated at a back table with distant cousins I had never met, far from the head table where the Harringtons held court. I had offered to contribute to the wedding, suggesting $5,000, which Daniel politely declined. "Your mother shouldn't have to spend her savings," Victoria had said with that patronizing smile. "We understand her situation is different from ours." After the wedding, Daniel and Victoria moved into a beautiful apartment downtown. The visits to my house became less frequent. When they did come, Victoria always had a comment ready. "Oh, Linda, you really should update this kitchen. These appliances are so old." Or, "Don't you find this neighborhood a bit isolated? Wouldn't you be happier in a nice retirement community?" The message was always clear. My life, my home, my choices were inferior to theirs. Daniel started to change too. He began dropping hints about how I should consider downsizing, how I didn't need all this space, how a smaller place would be easier to maintain. He meant well, I think. He was worried about his aging mother living alone. But the suggestions always came after visits with Victoria, and they always echoed her opinions. The monthly family dinners at the Harrington mansion were the worst. I was always invited last minute, an afterthought added to the guest list because it would look bad to exclude Daniel's mother. I would arrive in my Honda, parking next to their Mercedes and BMW, and immediately feel the weight of judgment. The dinners were elaborate affairs with multiple courses served by hired staff. I was given the cheapest wine, while others drank vintage bottles that cost hundreds of dollars. I was seated at the end of the long dining table, physically separated from the conversation. When I tried to contribute to discussions, Victoria would smile indulgently and say things like, "Oh, Linda, this is more of a business conversation. It's probably not your area." Or, "That's sweet, Linda, but we're talking about things you wouldn't understand." The implication was always the same. I was too simple, too working class, too beneath them to participate meaningfully. 6 months ago, something happened that changed everything. I was reviewing my mortgage portfolio, something I did quarterly to track payments and assess risk. Morrison Property Holdings owned 47 mortgages, ranging from small starter homes to larger investment properties. I went through each file methodically, checking payment histories and current balances. Then I opened a file that made my heart stop. Harrington, Charles, and Patricia. Address, 2847 Lakeshore Drive, the mansion, Victoria's parents' mansion. I stared at the documents, my mind racing. The original mortgage had been issued 15 years ago, shortly after Richard died, for $850,000. The current balance was $680,000. Monthly payment, $4,200. And there, in red ink, were notations I had learned to dread. Payment late, 30 days. Payment late, 60 days. Penalty assessed. Payment received. Another late payment the following month. I pulled up their complete payment history. For the first 10 years, payments had been regular and on time. Then, starting 5 years ago, the pattern became erratic. Late payments, penalties, occasional missed months followed by catch-up payments. The Harringtons were struggling. I cross-referenced their file with public records, something I always did when payment patterns changed. What I found shocked me. Charles Harrington's commercial real estate company had been failing for years. He had taken massive losses during the 2008 financial crisis and never recovered. Court documents showed multiple lawsuits from creditors. Tax liens had been filed and then mysteriously satisfied, probably by liquidating assets. The Harringtons were drowning in debt, living on credit and borrowed money, desperately trying to maintain the appearance of wealth while everything crumbled beneath them. The mansion, the luxury cars, the country club membership, the elaborate parties, it was all a facade. They were house poor, drowning in debt, one financial crisis away from total collapse. And I held the mortgage. I held the key to their entire lifestyle. For weeks I sat with this knowledge, unsure what to do. Should I tell Daniel? Should I confront the Harringtons? Should I offer to restructure their loan? I decided to wait and watch. If they kept paying, even late, I would keep quiet. It wasn't my place to expose their financial secrets. But if they mistreated my son or me, well, then I would have leverage. I never imagined how bad things would get, or how useful that leverage would become. The invitation arrived 3 weeks ago, embossed gold lettering on cream-colored cardstock. Charles and Patricia Harrington request the pleasure of your company at a celebration of their 30th wedding anniversary. Black tie, Riverside Country Club. I held the invitation, noting that it had arrived a full week after Daniel mentioned the party. An afterthought, as always. Daniel called that evening to make sure I was coming. "Of course, Mom. Victoria wants you there. It's important." I heard the subtle pressure in his voice, the unspoken message that my attendance was expected, required even, though not particularly desired. I confirmed I would be there, then spent the next 2 weeks dreading it. The night of the party, I stood in front of my closet trying to decide what to wear. Everything I owned suddenly felt inadequate. My nicest dress was from Macy's clearance rack, purchased 3 years ago for another wedding. It was navy blue, simple, appropriate for a woman my age. I paired it with modest heels and the pearl necklace Richard had given me for our 20th anniversary. Looking in the mirror, I saw a neat, respectable woman, but I knew what the Harringtons and their friends would see. Someone poor, someone beneath them, someone who didn't belong. I took a deep breath, straightened my shoulders, and drove to the country club in my Honda Civic. The Riverside Country Club was everything I wasn't. Elegant, expensive, exclusive. The circular driveway was filled with luxury vehicles, BMWs and Mercedes and Teslas gleaming under the carefully placed lighting. I pulled up behind a Porsche, and the young valet's face fell when he saw my 10-year-old Honda. He took my keys with barely concealed disdain, his fingers touching them like they might contaminate him. I watched him park my car in the far corner of the lot, away from the luxury vehicles, as if poverty might be contagious. The walk to the entrance felt endless, my sensible heels clicking against the stone pathway, while women in designer gowns glided past me like I was invisible. The security guard at the door actually stopped me. "Name, please?" His tone suggested he couldn't believe I belonged here. "Linda Morrison. I'm Daniel Morrison's mother." He scanned his list slowly, making me wait, then nodded reluctantly and waved me through. The ballroom was breathtaking, all crystal chandeliers and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the golf course. Round tables draped in white linens surrounded a dance floor, each centerpiece an elaborate arrangement of white roses and orchids that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. The room was filled with 200 guests, all dressed in tuxedos and evening gowns, all radiating wealth and confidence. I felt like an imposter at a ball, Cinderella before the fairy godmother, conspicuously out of place. I found my assigned seat at a table near the back of the room, far from the head table, where the Harringtons and their inner circle would sit. My tablemates were distant relatives I'd never met, elderly cousins who barely acknowledged me before returning to their own conversations. A waiter passed by with a tray of champagne, but he moved past our table without stopping, the good bottles apparently reserved for more important guests. I sat quietly, watching the room fill with Victoria's family and friends, all of them embracing and laughing and radiating that casual ease that comes from never having to worry about money. I checked my watch. Daniel was late, held up at work, he'd texted. I was alone in a room full of strangers who had already decided I didn't matter. Victoria worked the room like the socialite she was, her gold evening gown catching the light as she moved from group to group. She was in her element, surrounded by wealth and status, her laugh carrying across the ballroom. I watched her stop to greet various guests, touching arms and kissing cheeks, playing her role perfectly. She was, I had to admit, very good at this. She had been raised for rooms like this, trained from birth to navigate the world of money and status. When she finally noticed me sitting alone at the back table, I saw her expression shift. Not pleasure at seeing her mother-in-law, but annoyance, as if I were a problem to be managed. She leaned over to whisper something to her mother, Patricia, and both of them looked at me with identical expressions of disdain. Daniel finally arrived 40 minutes late, hurrying into the ballroom still adjusting his tie. He looked handsome in his tuxedo, my son all grown up and successful, but he didn't look for me. Instead, Victoria intercepted him at the entrance, pulling him immediately into her circle of friends. I watched him shake hands and make small talk, completely absorbed into their world. He didn't even glance toward the back of the room where his mother sat alone. For the first time, I felt not just excluded, but erased, as if I had become so insignificant that I no longer existed even in my own son's awareness. The feeling was crushing, a physical weight pressing on my chest. Dinner was served, course after elaborate course. Seared scallops, filet mignon, roasted vegetables arranged artistically on expensive china. The food was delicious, but I could barely taste it. I made polite conversation with the elderly cousins at my table, but their responses were perfunctory, making it clear they had no interest in knowing me. After dinner came the speeches. Charles Harrington stood at the microphone, tall and distinguished in his tuxedo, every inch the successful businessman. He spoke about 30 years of marriage, about building a life with Patricia, about the success they'd achieved together. He thanked various people in the room, name-dropping business associates and wealthy friends. He spoke about how proud he was of his daughter Victoria and her wonderful husband Daniel. He never mentioned me, not once. It was as if Daniel had materialized fully formed without a mother who had raised him alone after his father died. After the speeches, I needed air. The ballroom felt suffocating, the weight of exclusion pressing down on me. I made my way to the foyer, a grand space with marble floors and elaborate flower arrangements. The relief of being out of that room was immediate. I stood by a window, trying to compose myself, fighting back tears of humiliation and hurt. I had endured 3 years of subtle insults and condescension, but tonight felt different. Tonight I felt completely invisible, reduced to nothing in my son's new world. I heard voices approaching from outside, male laughter, and the smell of expensive cigars. A group of men were standing just beyond the doorway, smoking and drinking scotch. One of them noticed me through the window. "Hey, aren't you Daniel Morrison's mother?" I turned, nodded politely. The man was in his 50s, red-faced and loud, clearly several drinks into his evening. He laughed, a harsh sound that made me flinch. "Vicky said you were humble. That's one word for it." The other men laughed too, and I felt my face burn with embarrassment. I started to walk away, but then Victoria appeared with her mother Patricia. They must have seen me leave the ballroom and followed, perhaps worried about what I might do or say. "Oh, Linda, there you are." Victoria's voice was saccharine sweet, but her eyes were cold. "Are you lost?" "The party's inside, dear," Patricia added in that same condescending tone. "This area is for club members, Linda. Maybe you'd be more comfortable back at your table?" The implication was clear. I didn't belong here, not in this space, not with these people. I opened my mouth to respond, but one of the drunken men interrupted. "Vicky, your mother-in-law is cute. Like a little church mouse who wandered into the wrong house." The group erupted in laughter. Victoria didn't defend me. Instead, she smiled, encouraged by her audience. "Oh, she's harmless. Daniel's family is very simple people." The words hung in the air, I felt every eye on me, waiting to see how I would react to being dismissed so casually, so cruelly. I found my voice, trying to maintain dignity. Simple? Victoria turned to face me fully, emboldened by her friend's laughter and her mother's presence. Yes, Linda, simple, working class. There's nothing wrong with it, of course. It's just different from our world, Patricia chimed in, her voice dripping with false sympathy. Victoria has been wonderful about accepting Daniel despite his background. Haven't you, darling? Despite his background. As if my son were something to be tolerated, a charitable project, rather than a man to be valued. I felt anger rising in my throat, hot and bitter. Victoria, sensing my reaction and enjoying it, decided to press further. She had an audience now, and she was performing for them. Victoria leaned against the marble column, her gold dress shimmering, her expression one of mock concern. We've tried so hard to make you feel included, Linda. But you have to understand, this world is just different from what you're used to. The country club, the connections, the expectations. It's not your fault you don't fit in. You just come from a different place. One of her drunk friends enjoying the show added, "What did you call it, Vicky? When you were explaining Daniel's family background?" Victoria's smile widened. She knew exactly what he was referring to. She had probably told this story multiple times, laughing about her husband's poor mother at parties I wasn't invited to. "Oh, that," Victoria said, waving her hand dismissively. "I just told my friends that Daniel came from humble beginnings, that his mother is, well, lower class." A pause, deliberate and cruel. She looked directly at me, making sure I heard every word. Lower class garbage who got lucky. The silence that followed was absolute. 30 people had heard it. They stood frozen in the marble foyer, some gasping, others looking away in embarrassment, a few still laughing nervously. Victoria didn't look ashamed. She looked triumphant, satisfied that she had finally said what she'd been thinking for 3 years. Patricia stood beside her daughter, not correcting her, not apologizing, just watching me with that same cold disdain I had seen in her eyes 100 times before. Lower-class garbage who got lucky. The words echoed in my head, each syllable a knife. This was what they really thought of me. Not just Victoria, but her whole family, their entire social circle. I was garbage to them. Trash that had somehow stumbled into their world through my son's ambition. I stood there shaking, not with hurt anymore, but with rage. 3 years of subtle insults had built to this moment, this public humiliation, this final truth spoken aloud for everyone to hear. And then I heard footsteps behind me. Daniel had finally come looking for me. My son appeared in the doorway, his face flushed from the warm ballroom, his expression confused at the silent tableau before him. "Mom? What's going on?" I looked at my son, pleading silently for him to defend me, to stand up for me, to show that he still valued his mother more than these cruel people. Victoria quickly stepped in, her voice smooth and practiced. "Daniel, darling, your mother just came out for some air. We were just chatting, as if she hadn't just called me garbage in front of dozens of witnesses." I waited for Daniel to ask what happened, to notice the tension in the room, to see the tears in my eyes. But he didn't. He just looked uncomfortable, eager to escape this awkward moment and return to the party. "Mom, maybe you should head home. You look tired." Those words broke something in me. Not anger this time, but resignation. My son wasn't going to defend me. He was embarrassed by me, just like Victoria had said. He wanted me gone so he wouldn't have to deal with the awkwardness of his mother's humiliation. I nodded slowly, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. Daniel looked relieved. "Okay, good. Thanks for coming. I'll call you tomorrow." Then he turned and walked back into the ballroom without another word, leaving me standing in the foyer with the people who had just destroyed me. I walked to the parking lot in a daze, my heels clicking against the pavement. The valet brought my Honda around, barely hiding his contempt as he handed me the keys. I sat in my car for 10 minutes, tears streaming down my face, my whole body shaking. Lower-class garbage who got lucky. My daughter-in-law's words on repeat in my mind. My son's betrayal cutting deeper than any insult. I had given Daniel everything. I had worked myself to exhaustion to give him opportunities I never had. I had sacrificed and saved and supported him through every stage of his life. And he had repaid me by walking away when I needed him most, choosing his wife's approval over his mother's dignity. Then slowly, the tears stopped. My hands stopped shaking. Something cold and hard settled in my chest, replacing the hurt with clarity. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I needed. Arthur Chen, my attorney and the executor of Richard's estate. Arthur had handled all the legal work for Morrison Property Holdings for 15 years. He knew every detail of my business, every asset I controlled. I pressed call, not caring that it was 10:30 at night. Arthur answered on the third ring, his voice concerned. "Linda, Is everything all right? No, Arthur, it's not. I need you to prepare foreclosure paperwork. There was a pause then. Which property? I took a deep breath, feeling the power of what I was about to set in motion. The Harrington Mansion, 2847 Lakeshore Drive. Another pause. Longer this time. Linda, that's your daughter-in-law's parents' home. Are you sure about this? I could hear the warning in his voice, the concern about family relationships, the knowledge that this action would cause irreparable damage. But I was beyond caring about damage. They had damaged me, publicly, cruelly, and my son had stood by and let it happen. I'm absolutely sure. They're 90 days past due if we include the penalty periods from the previous late payments. I want formal notice of default sent immediately. Arthur hesitated. This will destroy your relationship with Daniel. Maybe it already is destroyed, I said quietly. Maybe it has been for 3 years, and I was just too blind to see it. There was a long silence, then Arthur sighed. I'll have the papers ready first thing Monday morning. We'll send the notice by certified mail. 30 days to cure the default, or we proceed with foreclosure. I thanked him and hung up. Then I started my car and drove home to my modest house, the house that was paid for, that had no debt, that was truly mine. I walked inside and made myself a cup of tea with hands that no longer trembled. I sat at my kitchen table, the same table where Richard and I had shared thousands of meals, where I had helped Daniel with his homework, where I had built my life with honesty and hard work. And I smiled, not with happiness, but with the cold satisfaction of someone who has finally stopped being a victim and become something else entirely. Victoria and her parents thought they had all the power. They thought wealth and status made them untouchable. But they had made one critical mistake. They had humiliated the wrong woman. They had called garbage the woman who owned their home. And now they were about to learn the most expensive lesson of their lives. The certified mail arrived at the Harrington Mansion on a Tuesday morning, exactly 1 week after the anniversary party. I knew because Arthur called me the moment the tracking system confirmed delivery. Linda, the notice has been received. Signed for by Charles Harrington himself at 9:42 this morning. Are you prepared for what comes next? I sat in my office at Morrison Property Holdings, looking at the file spread across my desk. 3 years of payment history. 3 years of the Harringtons living beyond their means while treating me like dirt. Am I prepared, Arthur? I've been preparing for this my entire life. I just didn't know it until now. He wished me luck and hung up. I imagined Charles opening that envelope, his hands shaking as he read the words. Notice of default. Failure to pay. 30 days to cure. Morrison Property Holdings, LLC. I wondered how long it would take him to make the connection. It took 4 hours. My office phone rang at 1:30 in the afternoon. Morrison Property Holdings, this is Linda Morrison speaking. There was a choked sound on the other end, then Charles Harrington's voice, strained and disbelieving. Linda? Linda Morrison? Yes, Charles. How can I help you? The silence stretched so long I thought he might have hung up. Then he spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. You own our mortgage. It wasn't a question. I've owned your mortgage for 15 years, Charles. Since Richard died and I took over the company, more silence. I could hear him breathing, could imagine him sitting in his study surrounded by the expensive furniture and artwork that he couldn't actually afford, holding the notice that threatened to take it all away. But you're just a... He stopped himself, realizing what he'd been about to say. Just a what, Charles? Just a simple working-class woman? Just lower-class garbage who got lucky. I let the words hang between us. He made a sound like he'd been punched. Linda, Victoria didn't mean... Yes, she did. She meant every word. And you stood there with your wife and let her say it. You've all spent 3 years making me feel small and worthless. Now you're calling me, begging for help from the garbage. The irony isn't lost on me. Charles cleared his throat, trying to regain composure, trying to find solid ground in a conversation that had already spun beyond his control. This is about business, not personal feelings. The mortgage is a business relationship. I laughed, a harsh sound that surprised even me. Now it's business? When you seated me at the back of your anniversary party, was that business? When your wife made sure I got the cheapest wine, was that business? When your daughter called me garbage in front of 30 people, was that business? No, Charles, you made this personal. I'm just responding in kind. He tried a different approach, his voice taking on the smooth tone of a man used to negotiating deals. Linda, we can work this out. The payment is just a few weeks late. Cash flow issues, nothing serious. A few weeks? I pulled up his payment history on my computer screen. Charles, you've been late 7 times in the last 18 months. You've paid penalties totaling $11,000. Your current balance due is $14,200. That's 3 months of payments plus penalties and late fees. I heard papers shuffling. He was looking at the notice, seeing the numbers in black and white, perhaps for the first time really understanding how deep his financial hole had become. $14,000. I can get that. Just give me 60 days. The standard terms allow 30 days to cure a default. You've had that notice for 4 hours. You have 29 days and 20 hours remaining. Charles, I've been more than patient. I've accepted late payments and penalties for over a year. But patience has limits. His voice cracked. Linda, please. This is our home. Our lives. Patricia and I have lived here for 18 years. This house is everything to us. I thought about that. Thought about how much that house meant to them. Not as a home, but as a symbol. A prop in their elaborate performance of wealth and status. That house was their stage, and without it, their entire act would collapse. Then maybe you should have thought about that before you raised a daughter who treats people like garbage. Maybe you should have lived within your means, instead of drowning in debt to maintain appearances. Maybe you should have been kind to the woman who held your financial future in her hands. But you didn't. You chose cruelty. Now you live with the consequences. I could hear Patricia in the background, her voice shrill with panic. What's happening? What did she say? Charles muffled the phone, but I could still hear snippets of frantic conversation. Then Victoria's voice, sharp and demanding. Let me talk to her. Let me handle this. A moment later, Victoria was on the line, her tone cold and imperious, still trying to maintain control, even as her world crumbled. Linda, this is ridiculous. You can't actually foreclose on my parents' home over a petty insult. Petty? You called me lower-class garbage in front of dozens of people. At your parents' anniversary party, while my son stood by and said nothing. That's not petty, Victoria. That's who you are, and who your parents raised you to be. Victoria's voice rose, losing the careful modulation she usually maintained. Fine, I'm sorry. Is that what you want to hear? I apologize for what I said. Now drop this ridiculous foreclosure threat. An apology given under duress isn't an apology. It's desperation. And I'm not interested in your desperate words. I'm interested in payment. $14,200 by the end of 30 days, or I proceed with foreclosure. You can't do this! This is extortion. It's business, Victoria. Isn't that what your father just told me? This is a business relationship. Your parents borrowed money. They're failing to repay it on time. I'm exercising my legal rights as the mortgage holder. There was a scuffling sound as the phone was passed again. This time Patricia's voice came through, high and trembling. Linda, surely we can discuss this reasonably. We're family now. Daniel is married to our daughter. Doesn't that mean anything? It meant something to me, Patricia. It meant I tried to be kind and patient while you treated me like hired help at your parties. It meant I hoped we could build a real relationship while you made sure I knew I wasn't good enough for your social circle. Family means respect. You showed me none. Now you want to claim family bonds when you need something from me? That's not how this works. But where will we go? Patricia's voice broke. If you take our house, where will we live? I don't know, Patricia. Maybe you can rent an apartment. Something modest. Working class even. Something within your actual means instead of the fantasy you've been living. The phone went dead. They'd hung up, probably to regroup and plan their next move. I sat back in my chair, my heart racing but my hands steady. This was really happening. I was foreclosing on my daughter-in-law's parents. I was using my financial power to destroy the people who had spent 3 years destroying me emotionally. Arthur had been right to warn me. This would have consequences. But those consequences had become inevitable the moment Victoria called me garbage and my son walked away. I pulled out my personal phone and saw 6 missed calls from Daniel. He knew. They'd told him, and now he was trying to fix it, trying to smooth things over like he always did. But some things couldn't be smoothed over. Some things had to break before they could be rebuilt. If they could be rebuilt at all, I didn't call Daniel back. Not yet. Instead, I spent the rest of the afternoon documenting everything. I printed copies of the Harringtons' complete payment history. I compiled public records showing Charles Harrington's failing business and mounting debts. I prepared a timeline of every insulting comment Victoria had made over 3 years, every slight, every condescending remark. I was building a case not for court, but for my son. When Daniel finally confronted me, I would show him everything. I would make him see what I had endured while he was too dazzled by wealth to notice. That evening, Daniel appeared at my door without calling first. He looked terrible, his tie loosened, his hair disheveled, his eyes red-rimmed. He pushed past me into the house, into the modest living room he'd grown up in, and spun to face me. Mom, what the hell are you doing? Foreclosing on a mortgage that's in default. Business, Daniel, just business. Don't give me that. This is Victoria's parents. This is my family. I felt something cold settle over me. Your family? What about me, Daniel? Am I your family? Of course you are. That's why I don't understand why you're doing this. Because your wife called me lower-class garbage. Because you stood there and let her do it. Because you told me to go home like I was an embarrassment. Because for 3 years, you've let them treat me like I'm beneath them, and you never once defended me. Daniel ran his hands through his hair, pacing my small living room. She was drunk. She didn't mean it. People say stupid things when they're drunk. Drunk words are sober thoughts. She meant every word, and you know it. I sat down on my sofa, suddenly exhausted. Daniel, sit down. We need to talk. He remained standing, too agitated to sit. There's nothing to talk about. You need to call them back and stop this foreclosure. I'm not stopping anything. They have 30 days to pay what they owe. If they pay, the foreclosure is cancelled. If they don't pay, I proceed. It's that simple. It's not simple. They don't have $14,000. Daniel's voice cracked on those words, and I saw the truth dawn on his face. His wealthy in-laws, the people he'd been so impressed by, the family whose world he'd been so eager to join, were broke. They'd been living a lie, and he'd believed it completely. I pulled out the folder I'd prepared and handed it to him. Sit down and read this. Daniel, still standing, opened the folder. I watched his face as he read through the payment history, the late notices, the public records of his father-in-law's failing business. Page by page, his expression changed from anger to confusion to dawning horror. Charles Harrington's company filed for bankruptcy protection twice in the last 10 years. His personal debt exceeds $2 million. The house is mortgaged for $680,000. The cars are leased. The country club membership is 6 months behind on payments. They're drowning, Daniel. They have been for years. Everything you thought was real about them is a performance. They're actors playing rich while going broke. Daniel sank onto the sofa, the folder falling from his hands. I don't understand. The parties, the lifestyle, everything, all borrowed, all leveraged, all fake. I pulled out another document. Here's what the house is actually worth. Market value is approximately $1.2 million. Their equity is about $520,000. If I foreclose and sell it, after paying off the mortgage and fees, they'll walk away with around $450,000. Enough to buy a modest house with cash and live comfortably if they change their lifestyle. They won't be homeless, Daniel. They'll just be normal, like the rest of us. He looked up at me, and I saw my son clearly for the first time in years. Saw past the expensive suits and the corporate polish to the boy I'd raised. Mom, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I didn't defend you at the party. I'm sorry I told you to leave. I was wrong. Why didn't you defend me? I asked quietly. Why did you let your wife call your mother garbage and say nothing? Daniel's face crumpled. I was embarrassed. He said it so quietly I almost didn't hear. I was embarrassed by you in that moment, surrounded by all those wealthy people, and I hated myself for it even as I felt it. Victoria has spent 3 years making me feel like I came from nothing, like I should be ashamed of where I came from. And in that moment, I was ashamed of my mother who worked 3 jobs to put me through college. I was ashamed of my father who built a business helping regular people. I was ashamed of everything real in my life because I wanted to belong to their fake world. The tears came then, his and mine. I'm not proud of who I've become, Mom. I look in the mirror and I don't recognize myself. I reached over and took his hand. Then maybe it's time to find yourself again. Time to remember what actually matters. Daniel nodded, wiping his eyes. But can't you give them more time? Work out a payment plan? I shook my head. No more special treatment. They've gotten away with late payments for 18 months because I wanted to avoid confrontation. But after what Victoria said, after 3 years of subtle cruelty, I'm done being patient. They pay in full in 30 days or I foreclose. Those are the terms. Daniel stood up, the folder of documents still on the sofa. I need to go. I need to think about all of this. Before he left, he turned back. For what it's worth, I had no idea you had money. I always thought you were just getting by. That's because money was never what mattered to me. Character mattered. Kindness mattered. Treating people with dignity regardless of their bank account mattered. Your in-laws never learned that lesson. Maybe losing their house will teach them. After Daniel left, I sat in the quiet of my modest home and felt no triumph, no satisfaction. Just a deep sadness that things had come to this, that my relationship with my son had deteriorated so completely, that the only way to make him see the truth was to threaten his in-laws with financial ruin. But I also felt something else, a clarity, a sense of standing up for myself in a way I never had before. I had spent 64 years being kind and accommodating and swallowing insults to keep the peace. I was done. The Harringtons would pay their debt or lose their house. Victoria would learn that cruelty has consequences. And Daniel would have to choose what kind of man he wanted to be. The next 29 days would determine all of our futures. The next 2 weeks were chaos. Charles Harrington tried every lender in the Tri-County area, begging for a bridge loan to cover the $14,000. Every single one rejected him. His credit score was too low, his debt-to-income ratio too high, his business too far underwater. He tried to borrow from friends, those wealthy connections he'd cultivated so carefully over the years. But when you're only friends with people because of perceived status, they disappear quickly when the status crumbles. One by one, his calls went unreturned. Patricia pawned her jewelry, the pieces she'd worn to country club events and charity galas. She raised $8,000, barely half of what they needed. She cried when she came home with the check, mourning not the sentimental value of the jewelry, but the status symbols they represented. Victoria, meanwhile, was unraveling. Her event planning business, built entirely on her parents' connections and social standing, was collapsing. 3 clients had already cancelled, spooked by rumors that the Harringtons were in financial trouble. In Victoria's world, poverty was contagious, something to be avoided at all costs. Her carefully constructed life was disintegrating, and she had no idea how to stop it. She called Daniel constantly, demanding he do something, fix this, make his mother see reason. Daniel, caught between his wife and his mother, stopped answering her calls. He'd moved into a hotel, needing space to think, to process everything he'd learned about his in-laws and himself. Victoria interpreted this as betrayal, as choosing his garbage mother over his wife. On day 16, my office phone rang. It was Victoria. She'd gotten the number from Daniel, though he'd probably told her not to call. "Linda, we need to meet, face to face." I considered refusing, but curiosity won. "Fine, tomorrow at 2. My office." She started to argue, probably wanting neutral territory, but I hung up before she could object. My office, my rules. The next afternoon, Victoria arrived at Morrison Property Holdings exactly on time. She dressed for battle, a designer suit and heels, her makeup perfect, her hair styled. She walked into my modest office like she was entering enemy territory, her eyes sweeping over the simple furniture and outdated computer with barely concealed disdain. Even now, even desperate, she couldn't hide her contempt for anything less than luxury. She sat across from my desk without being invited, crossing her legs and fixing me with what she probably thought was an intimidating stare. "We need to resolve this situation." "There's nothing to resolve, Victoria. Your parents owe $14,200. They have 14 days left to pay. If they pay, the foreclosure is cancelled. If they don't, I proceed. It's very simple." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to that manipulative tone I'd heard her use on Daniel 100 times. "Linda, I know we haven't always seen eye to eye. I know I've made mistakes, but this is too extreme. You're destroying my family over words." Over a moment of drunken stupidity, I pulled out a notebook from my desk drawer, the one I'd been keeping for 3 years. "Let me read you something, Victoria." I opened to the first page. "October 15th, 3 years ago. You came to my house for the first time. You called it quaint, then added that I'd done so much with so little. January 22nd, 2 years ago. At your engagement party, you introduced me to your friends as Daniel's mother, then added that his family was very different from yours. April 9th, same year. At Easter dinner, you suggested I might be happier in a retirement community because this neighborhood was probably too isolating for someone my age." I flipped through pages, reading entry after entry. Victoria's face grew paler with each one. I documented everything, Victoria. Every condescending comment, every subtle insult, every time you made me feel small and worthless. This isn't about one drunken moment. This is about 3 years of systematic cruelty. She sat back, genuinely shocked. "You kept track? Why would you do that?" "Because I knew eventually I would need proof. I knew people like you always escalate. You started with subtle digs and worked your way up to calling me garbage in public. I needed documentation of the pattern." Victoria's composure cracked. "This is insane. You're insane. Keeping a diary of slights like some obsessed stalker." "Maybe I am obsessed. Obsessed with being treated with basic human dignity. Obsessed with demanding respect. Obsessed with not accepting cruelty just to keep the peace." Her eyes narrowed. "You planned this. You've been planning this for 3 years. No, I documented this for 3 years, hoping I'd never need it. But then you called me garbage, and my son said nothing. That's when I decided to stop being a victim." Victoria changed tactics again, her voice becoming pleading. "Please, Linda, I'll do anything. I'll apologize publicly. I'll tell everyone I was wrong. Just don't take their house." "I don't want your apology, Victoria. I want payment. $14,200 in 14 days. That's the only thing that stops this." She threw up her hands in frustration. "We don't have that money. We've tried everything." "Then you'll lose the house. It's that simple." "You can't do this." Victoria stood up, her voice rising. "This is extortion. This is revenge." "It's business. You've told me that repeatedly over the years. That I wouldn't understand business matters. That my working-class mind couldn't grasp the complexities of your world. Well, this is business, Victoria, and I understand it perfectly. Your parents borrowed money they can't repay. I'm exercising my legal rights as the lender. That's capitalism. That's the free market. That's the system your family claims to value so highly." "What about Daniel?" Victoria shouted. "You're destroying our marriage. Do you even care about your son's happiness?" I stood up to match her, my voice cold and steady. "I cared about my son's happiness when I worked 3 jobs to put him through college. I cared when I gave him $30,000 for a house down payment. I cared every single day of his life when I sacrificed for him. Where was your concern for his happiness when you were teaching him to be ashamed of where he came from? When you were training him to value status over character? When you were turning him into someone who walks away from his mother's humiliation? You don't get to lecture me about my son. Victoria's eyes filled with tears, but I couldn't tell if they were real or calculated. Please, I'm begging you. There has to be something I can do. There was. You could have been kind. You could have treated me with basic respect. You could have built a real relationship instead of viewing me as something beneath you. But you didn't. You chose cruelty. And now you're learning that cruelty has consequences. Victoria wiped her eyes, her mascara smudging. What do you want from me? An apology? Groveling? Public humiliation? What will make you happy? I sat back down, suddenly exhausted. I don't want anything from you, Victoria. I want what I'm owed. $14,200. Everything else is just noise. She stared at me for a long moment, and I saw something shift in her expression. A dawning realization. You really don't care about the money. This is about power. About making us feel powerless like you felt. I met her gaze steadily. Maybe. Or maybe it's about teaching you that being poor doesn't make someone worthless, and being rich doesn't make someone valuable. Maybe it's about showing you that the woman you treated like garbage was worth more than your entire family combined. Victoria left without another word. I watched her walk to her luxury car, the one that was leased, the one she couldn't actually afford. She sat in the driver's seat for a full 5 minutes before starting the engine, her shoulders shaking. I felt no satisfaction, just a deep, weary sadness that things had come to this. That evening, Daniel called. Mom, Victoria told me about your meeting, about the notebook. I didn't know it was that bad. You weren't supposed to know. You were supposed to be happy with your new wife and your new life. But you weren't happy, were you? A long silence. No, I wasn't. I kept telling myself I was, but I wasn't. Every family dinner was torture, watching them treat you like help. Every time Victoria made a comment about you, I died a little inside. But I said nothing because I wanted to belong. I wanted to be part of their world. And now? Now I'm ashamed. Ashamed of myself, ashamed of my silence, ashamed that it took you threatening to foreclose before I found my spine. Daniel's voice broke. I've been a terrible son. You've been a lost son. There's a difference. But you're finding your way back. That counts for something. He was quiet for a moment, then asked the question I'd been waiting for. Will you really do it? Will you really take their house? If they don't pay, yes, without hesitation. Even if it costs you me? Especially if it costs me you. Because if I have to sacrifice my dignity to keep my son, then I've already lost you anyway. Better to lose you standing up for myself than keep you while on my knees. I could hear him crying softly on the other end. I love you, Mom. I'm sorry for everything. I love you too, sweetheart. That's why this has to happen. Day 28 arrived, 2 days before the deadline. Charles Harrington called my office at 3 in the afternoon. His voice was hollow, defeated. Linda, we have $11,000. It's everything we could scrape together. The cars are sold. Patricia's jewelry is gone. We borrowed from everyone we could. It's not enough, but it's all we have. Please accept it and give us more time. I pulled up their account on my computer. The payment due is $14,200, Charles. You're $3,200 short. I know, but surely that's close enough. Surely you can show some mercy here. Mercy. I thought about that word. Thought about all the times I'd shown mercy by accepting late payments. All the times I'd been kind while being treated cruelly. All the mercy that had been interpreted as weakness. No, Charles. I can't accept partial payment. The terms are clear. Full payment by 5 p.m. tomorrow, or I file foreclosure proceedings on Friday morning. There was a choked sob on the line. You're really going to do this? You're really going to take our home? Yes, unless you pay in full. That's always been the deal. The line went dead. I sat in my office, staring at the phone, waiting to feel something. Guilt, satisfaction, anything. But I just felt numb. I was about to destroy a family, to take their home, to publicly humiliate them the way they'd humiliated me. And I was going to do it without flinching. That realization should have scared me, but it didn't. It felt right. It felt like justice. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed in my modest house, the house that was paid for, that was truly mine, and thought about everything that had led to this moment. About Richard, who would probably tell me I was being too harsh. About Daniel, who was learning painful lessons about loyalty and values. About the Harringtons, who were about to lose everything because they'd never learned that kindness costs nothing but means everything. At 11 p.m., my doorbell rang. I almost didn't answer, but something made me get up and look through the peephole. Victoria stood on my porch, alone, without makeup, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She looked younger, more vulnerable, stripped of all the polish and pretense. I opened the door. Victoria, it's late. I know. I'm sorry. Can I come in, please? I stepped aside and let her enter. She stood in my living room, looking around at the modest furniture, the worn carpet, the life I'd built with honesty instead of pretense. This is a nice home. It's comfortable, real. I didn't know how to respond to that, so I just waited. Victoria turned to face me, and I saw that she'd been crying for hours, her eyes red and swollen. "I came to tell you that you're right. About everything." I blinked, surprised. "That's not what I expected to hear. It's the truth. You were right about me, about my parents, about the way we treated you. We were cruel and condescending and terrible. And we did it because we felt superior, because we thought money and status made us better than you. But we were wrong. We're not better. We're worse, because you built something real with honesty and hard work, and we built a lie with borrowed money and fake smiles." Victoria sat down on my sofa without being invited, and for once I didn't mind. "I've been thinking about something you said, about how being poor doesn't make someone worthless and being rich doesn't make someone valuable. My whole life I was taught the opposite. I was raised to believe that wealth was the measure of a person's worth, that people like you, working-class people, were somehow less than us. And I believed it. I never questioned it." I sat down across from her, listening. "What changed?" "Meeting you, actually. Not at first. At first, you confirmed everything I'd been taught. Small house, old car, simple clothes. I thought I knew everything about you from those external markers. But Daniel would tell me stories about you, about how you worked 3 jobs to put him through college, how you started with nothing and built a successful business, how you gave him $30,000 without hesitation when he needed it. And I realized that everything I thought I knew was wrong. You weren't small or simple or less than us. You were stronger and more successful than my parents ever were. But I couldn't admit that, so I kept tearing you down to maintain my illusion of superiority." Victoria looked at me with genuine remorse in her eyes. "Calling you garbage was the worst thing I've ever done. And watching Daniel walk away without defending you was the moment I realized I'd broken something that couldn't be fixed. I'd broken my marriage by turning my husband into someone who could abandon his mother. And I'd broken my own character by becoming someone cruel. I don't expect you to forgive me, Linda. I don't expect you to stop the foreclosure. I just wanted you to know that you taught me something my parents never could. That character matters more than appearances. That kindness costs nothing but means everything. And that the woman I called garbage is worth more than I'll ever be." She stood up, preparing to leave. "I'm sorry. For everything. I know it's too late, but I needed to say it." "Wait," I said. She turned back, surprised. "That apology just now, did you mean it? Or are you trying to manipulate me into stopping the foreclosure?" Victoria smiled sadly. 6 weeks ago, I would have been manipulating you. Tonight, I genuinely mean it. I know the difference now. I'm losing everything anyway. My husband, my home, my business, my illusions. At least I can lose them honestly." She left, and I sat alone in my living room, her words echoing in my mind. For the first time since the anniversary party, I felt the weight of what I was doing. Not guilt exactly, but a recognition that revenge, even justified revenge, leaves scars on everyone involved. The next morning, day 29, I sat in my office waiting for the deadline. At 4 p.m., my phone rang. It was Arthur. "Linda, Charles Harrington just arrived at my office with a cashier's check for $14,200. "The full amount. Where did they get it?" I asked, genuinely surprised. "He says he sold his business. Liquidated everything, called in every favor, and sold what was left of his company to a competitor. The money just cleared. The default is cured." I sat back in my chair, processing this information. "So the foreclosure is canceled?" "Technically, yes. They've paid in full. The default is resolved. But Linda, you should know something. Charles also left a letter for you." Arthur paused. "He wants you to know that losing his business was easier than losing his home. That material things can be rebuilt, but family can't. He says he's sorry for how his family treated you, and he hopes that someday you can forgive them. He understands if you can't." I hung up and sat in silence for a long time. The Harringtons had paid. They'd liquidated Charles's business, the last remnant of his professional identity, to save their home. They'd made the ultimate sacrifice, giving up status and income to keep the roof over their heads. And in doing so, they'd learned the lesson I'd been trying to teach them. That pride comes before the fall. That living beyond your means destroys you. That kindness and humility matter more than appearances. The foreclosure was canceled, but everything had changed. The Harringtons would keep their house, but they'd lost everything else. And I had won my war, but at a cost I was only beginning to understand. 3 months passed before I saw any of the Harringtons again. Arthur had handled the final paperwork, ensuring the mortgage was current and the foreclosure officially canceled. The $14,200 had been paid, the account was marked as resolved, and legally, everything was settled. But emotionally, nothing was settled. The explosion I had detonated had left debris scattered across all our lives, and I was still trying to understand what I had built and what I had destroyed. Daniel called me weekly now, rebuilding the relationship we'd nearly lost. He'd moved out of the hotel and into a small apartment by himself. He and Victoria were separated, not yet divorced, but living apart while they figured out who they were and what they wanted. Daniel visited me one Saturday afternoon in late November. Almost 4 months after the anniversary party that had changed everything. He looked different, more like the son I remembered. He'd traded his expensive suits for jeans and sweaters on the weekends. He drove a modest car now, having sold the luxury sedan Victoria had insisted he needed for his image. We sat in my kitchen drinking coffee, and he told me about his life. I've been thinking a lot about values, Mom. About what I was taught growing up versus what I learned being married to Victoria. You taught me that work had dignity, that character mattered, that how you treated people was more important than what you owned. But somewhere along the way, I forgot all of that. I got seduced by the lifestyle, the status, the idea that I'd made it because I married into wealth. I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. You didn't forget. You just got lost for a while. Sometimes we have to lose ourselves to find ourselves again. He nodded, his eyes wet. I'm ashamed of who I became. The man who let his wife call his mother garbage and said nothing. The man who was embarrassed by the woman who gave him everything. I don't know how to forgive myself for that. You start by becoming someone different. Someone who wouldn't make those choices again. Someone who values the right things. Are you that person now? I'm trying to be. Every day I'm trying. That's all any of us can do, sweetheart. Just try every day to be better than we were yesterday. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, and then Daniel asked the question I'd been expecting. Have you heard from them? The Harringtons? Not directly. Arthur tells me they're current on their mortgage. Paying on time every month. That's all I know. Daniel nodded slowly. I've talked to Charles a few times. He's working as an accountant now. Regular job, regular hours. Patricia got a position at a boutique, part-time. They're living on a budget for the first time in their lives. He says it's hard but honest. And Victoria? Daniel's face clouded. She moved out of her parents' house last month, rented a small apartment across town. She's trying to rebuild her event planning business from scratch without her parents' connections. It's slow going. She asks about you sometimes. Asks if you're okay, if you hate her. Do you hate her? I considered that question carefully. No, I don't hate her. I pity her. She was raised wrong, taught wrong, given values that were hollow and destructive. She's having to rebuild her entire understanding of the world at 32 years old. That's painful, but necessary. The holidays approached, and I found myself thinking about the Harringtons despite trying not to. I wondered how they would celebrate Christmas this year, in their mansion that they'd nearly lost, with their diminished finances and humbled circumstances. I wondered if they'd learned anything real from the experience, or if they were just waiting for things to return to normal. On Christmas Eve, I was at home alone when my doorbell rang at 6 p.m. I opened it to find Charles and Patricia Harrington standing on my porch, holding a simple box wrapped in plain paper. They looked different. Charles wore a regular coat, not the designer wool he'd always favored. Patricia had no jewelry, her hands bare. They looked older, tired, but somehow more real than I'd ever seen them. Linda, Charles began, his voice hesitant. We came to thank you. To thank me? For nearly taking your house? Patricia spoke up, her voice soft. For teaching us something we needed to learn. May we come in? I stepped aside, letting them enter. They stood awkwardly in my living room, taking in the modest surroundings with different eyes than they'd had before. The last time they'd been here, 3 years ago, they'd looked at everything with barely concealed contempt. Now they looked with something closer to respect. Please sit, I said, gesturing to the sofa. They sat close together, holding hands, and I realized I'd never seen them touch before. At all their elaborate parties and dinners, they'd always performed their roles separately. This small gesture of unity was new. Charles cleared his throat. Linda, we came to apologize, properly, not because we want something from you, but because you deserve to hear it. We treated you terribly. We were condescending and cruel, and we taught our daughter to be the same way. We judged you based on your house and your car and your clothes, and we never saw the person underneath. The strong, successful woman who built something real while we were building a house of cards. Patricia nodded, tears in her eyes. I called myself a philanthropist. I sat on charity boards and organized fundraisers for the less fortunate. But I treated you, a woman who worked her whole life and built a successful business, like you were beneath me. The hypocrisy is staggering. I thought caring about poor people made me a good person, but I couldn't show basic kindness to the woman at my dinner table. I didn't know what to say, so I just listened. Charles continued, losing the business was the best thing that ever happened to me. I know that sounds strange, but it's true. I'd been failing for years, drowning in debt, lying to everyone including myself about how successful I was. Selling what was left, paying you that $14,000, it forced me to face reality. I'm an accountant now, a regular employee earning a regular salary. And for the first time in a decade, I sleep at night. I don't wake up at 3 a.m. panicking about which creditor to pay first. I'm not successful by the world's standards, but I'm honest. And that's worth more than I ever understood. Patricia added, and I'm working retail. Me, Patricia Harrington, who used to shop at the stores. Now I work at one. And you know what? It's hard and humbling and absolutely necessary. I talk to customers who remind me of you, Linda. Working women who come in on their lunch breaks, who carefully check prices, who treat me with kindness even though I'm just a sales clerk. And I realize that's how I should have treated you. With kindness, with respect, regardless of your bank account. Charles handed me the wrapped box. This is for you, a gift. Not because we're trying to buy forgiveness, but because we wanted you to have something meaningful. I unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a leather-bound book. I opened it to find pages and pages of handwritten text. It's our apology, Patricia explained. Every incident we could remember, every unkind comment, every moment of disrespect. We wrote them all down, and then we wrote what we should have done instead. It took us 2 months to complete. We wanted you to know that we see what we did. We acknowledge it. We own it. I flipped through the pages, reading entries. November 10th, 3 years ago. At Thanksgiving dinner, Linda brought homemade rolls. Patricia made a comment about how nice it was that Linda had time to bake, implying she had nothing better to do. What we should have said, thank you, Linda. These are delicious, and we're grateful you took the time to make them. Entry after entry, moment after moment, they had documented their cruelty and rewritten it with kindness. It was perhaps the most thoughtful gift I'd ever received. Not because it erased what they'd done, but because it showed they understood. They saw their behavior clearly and were willing to do the hard work of changing. Thank you, I said quietly. This means more than you know. Charles and Patricia stood to leave. Before they reached the door, Patricia turned back. Linda, I need you to know something about Victoria. She's devastated by what she did. She knows she destroyed her marriage and hurt you terribly. She's in therapy now, trying to understand why she became so cruel, trying to unlearn everything we taught her. She asks about you constantly, asks if there's any way to make amends. I don't expect you to forgive her. I'm not sure I've forgiven myself, but I wanted you to know she's trying to change. After they left, I sat with the book for hours, reading every entry, seeing 3 years of pain acknowledged and witnessed. It didn't erase what had happened, but it helped. It helped to know they understood. It helped to know the lesson had been learned. 2 weeks later, in early January, Victoria called me. Her voice was tentative, almost frightened. Linda, it's Victoria. I know I have no right to call, but I was hoping we could meet. Just for coffee. I'll understand if you say no. We met at a small cafe downtown, nothing fancy. Victoria arrived before me, waiting at a corner table. She looked different. Her hair was simpler. Her clothes were nice but not designer. She wore minimal makeup and no jewelry. When she saw me, she stood up nervously. Thank you for coming. I didn't think you would. I ordered coffee and we sat in uncomfortable silence for a moment. Then Victoria spoke, her words tumbling out in a rush. I've been in therapy for 3 months, trying to understand why I became someone so cruel. And I've learned a lot about myself, about how I was raised, about the values I absorbed without questioning. But none of that excuses what I did. Nothing excuses calling you garbage. Nothing excuses 3 years of condescension and cruelty. I destroyed my marriage, I hurt you terribly, and I deserve every consequence I'm facing. I didn't come here to ask for forgiveness. I came to tell you that you were right about everything. About me, about my parents, about the emptiness of a life built on status instead of substance. She looked at me with tears in her eyes. I lost Daniel and I deserve to lose him. He's better off without me. But I need you to know that I'm trying to become someone different. Someone who would treat people like you with the respect you always deserved. We talked for 2 hours. Victoria told me about her therapy, about confronting the classism and entitlement she'd been raised with, about learning to value people for who they are rather than what they have. She told me about her struggling business, about how humbling it was to work without her parents' connections, about how she was learning the value of earned success rather than inherited privilege. I told her about the pain of those 3 years, about the loneliness of being excluded from my son's life, about the breaking point of being called garbage. We cried together, 2 women who had hurt and been hurt, trying to find a way forward. At the end, Victoria asked the question I knew was coming. Is there any chance at all, that someday you could forgive me? I thought about that carefully. Forgiveness isn't something I can promise, Victoria. It's not a switch I can flip. It's a process, and it takes time. But I can tell you this. I see that you're trying to change. I see that you understand what you did and why it was wrong. That's more than I expected, and it's a start. We're not friends. We may never be friends, but we don't have to be enemies. Victoria nodded, wiping her eyes. That's more than I deserve. Thank you, Linda, for everything. For teaching me the hardest lesson I've ever learned. Even if the method was brutal, I needed it. As she left, I watched her walk to her modest car, her shoulders straighter than they'd been when she arrived. She was learning. They were all learning, and maybe, in time, something good could grow from the ashes of what I'd burned down. 6 months after the anniversary party, Daniel and Victoria's divorce was finalized. It was amicable, both of them acknowledging that they'd married for the wrong reasons and become people they didn't like. Daniel kept the apartment. Victoria moved to a different city, starting fresh somewhere she wasn't known as the girl who'd nearly lost her parents' house. They parted as friends, or at least as two people who'd learned valuable lessons from their shared mistakes. Daniel threw himself into rebuilding his relationship with me. He visited every weekend. We cooked together, talked for hours, reconnected in ways we hadn't since he was a teenager. He was finding himself again, remembering who he'd been before he got lost in the world of status and appearances. One Saturday in late spring, Daniel brought someone to meet me. "This is Julia," he said, his voice nervous but happy. "She's a teacher at the elementary school near my office. We've been dating for 2 months, and I wanted you to meet her." Julia was lovely, warm and genuine, with laugh lines around her eyes and clothes from Target. She shook my hand firmly and looked me directly in the eye. "Mrs. Morrison, it's so nice to meet you. Daniel talks about you constantly. Please call me Linda." We spent the afternoon together, the three of us, and I watched my son with this new woman. He was different with her, more himself, more relaxed. He laughed easily and didn't worry about impressions or appearances. At one point, Julia excused herself to use the bathroom, and Daniel leaned over to me. "What do you think?" "I think she's real, and I think you're real when you're with her. That's all that matters." Julia came back and caught the tail end of our conversation. "Real is good," she said with a smile. "I've had enough fake in my life." Daniel told me about everything that happened, about Victoria and the foreclosure and all of it. She looked at me with respect. "What you did took courage. Standing up for yourself when it cost you everything. I admire that." "I didn't do it for admiration," I said. "I did it because I had to. Because being treated like garbage while staying silent was killing me slowly. Sometimes you have to break things to rebuild them properly." Julia nodded. "My grandmother used to say that sometimes you have to burn down the field before you can plant new crops. Sounds like that's what you did. Burned down a toxic dynamic so something healthier could grow." I liked her immediately. 1 year after the anniversary party, I received a letter from Charles Harrington. It was handwritten, several pages long. He told me about their life now, about Patricia's promotion at the boutique, about his steady work as an accountant, about their budget that they actually stuck to, about selling the country club membership and not missing it at all, about friendships built on genuine connection rather than social climbing. He wrote about Victoria's progress, how she'd built a small but successful event planning business in her new city, how she was dating a teacher and seemed genuinely happy. And he wrote about me, about how the lesson I'd taught them, brutal as it was, had saved their family, had forced them to face truths they'd been avoiding for years, had given them the chance to become people they could respect. He ended the letter with a simple statement. "We're better people now because of what you did, Linda. We're poorer in money, but richer in character. Thank you for caring enough about your dignity to demand we respect it. Thank you for teaching us that cruelty has consequences. Thank you for being strong enough to stand up to us when we deserved it." I folded the letter carefully and put it in a drawer with the leather-bound book of apologies. Evidence that the war I'd waged had been worth fighting, that the relationships I'd broken had been rebuilt into something more honest, that the pain had led to growth. I thought about Richard sometimes, wondering what he would think about everything that had happened. Would he be proud of me for standing up for myself? Or disappointed that I'd been so harsh? I'd never know for sure, but I like to think he'd understand. Richard had always valued honesty and dignity. He would have hated seeing me diminished and dismissed. Maybe he would have approved of my methods, or maybe not. But I thought he'd approve of the outcome, of a family forced to face hard truths and emerging better for it. Daniel proposed to Julia on a quiet Sunday afternoon in my backyard. No elaborate production, no expensive ring, just two people who loved each other making a promise. They married 6 months later in a simple ceremony at a small church. 50 guests, homemade food, decorations we put up ourselves. It was perfect, real, honest. Everything Daniel's first wedding hadn't been. As I watched my son dance with his new wife, both of them laughing and relaxed and genuinely happy, I felt at peace. This was worth it, all of it. The pain and the confrontation and the hard lessons. This moment, watching my son living authentically with someone who valued him for who he was rather than what he could provide, this was worth every difficult decision I'd made. Charles and Patricia sent a gift with a note. We weren't invited to the wedding, and we understand why. But we wanted Daniel and Julia to know we're happy for them. We're happy that Daniel found someone who values what really matters. And we wanted you to know, Linda, that we're grateful for the lesson you taught us. We're better people now. Better grandparents if Daniel ever gives us that chance. Better friends. Better humans. Thank you for the gift of hard truth. I showed the note to Daniel, and he read it with tears in his eyes. Do you think we could have them over for dinner sometime? Not right away, but eventually. I think that would be nice, I said. People can change if they want to badly enough. They wanted to. That counts for something. As I write this, 2 years have passed since the anniversary party that changed everything. The Harringtons are still living in their mansion, now truly appreciating it because they nearly lost it. They're still paying their mortgage on time, every month, no exceptions. Daniel and Julia are expecting their first child, my first grandchild. Victoria sent a card congratulating them, adding a note for me. Thank you for saving me from myself, Linda. I'm happy now. Really happy. Not performing happiness, but feeling it. That's your gift to me, even though I didn't deserve it. I keep that card on my refrigerator, a reminder that even the most broken relationships can heal if people are willing to do the work. And me? I'm still living in my modest house, still driving my practical car, still running Morrison Property Holdings. The money sits in accounts, generating income, providing security, but not defining who I am. I learned something important through all of this. That demanding respect doesn't make you cruel. That setting boundaries doesn't make you selfish. That standing up for yourself, even when it costs you relationships, is sometimes the most loving thing you can do. Because staying silent teaches people that cruelty is acceptable. And it's not. It never was. Victoria called me lower-class garbage, and in that moment, I could have stayed silent. I could have swallowed the insult like I'd swallowed hundreds before. But I didn't. I used the power I had to teach a lesson that needed teaching. And in doing so, I saved not just my own dignity, but an entire family from their own worst impulses. That's not revenge. That's education. Expensive education, yes, but the most valuable lessons usually are.